we're going to be talking about my three favorite strategies to build relationships in the multifamily industry online. And what we're going to be going over is, where do you find these partners? How do you establish credibility, whether you have experience or no experience? How do you build relationships out of state? How do you add value to someone when you have experience or no experience? What truly defines a good partner, and why also, at the end of the day, should somebody want to talk to you? So a little bit about at least my background. Now, with me being one of the investor relations associates here, I didn't have a clear network jumping into the multifamily industry. I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree and was able to be a dancer on Jimmy Kimmel Live. You can see me there in the back. And I built some beautiful restaurants. These were some of the restaurants that I've built: Din Tai Fung, a Haidilao Lao in Northern California and Southern California. And everything was going well until COVID happened and we lost all of our jobs. And so throughout the time when I was working, I was always, I feel like, going down that similar path of reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, going to Bigger Pockets. And I knew I've always wanted to at least get into multifamily syndication. And since I had so much time when we got laid off, I figured, why not start now? And I didn't have the luxury of going to in-person meetups, and I didn't have the capital to join a prestigious mentorship or mastermind group. I was forced to network and build relationships online, whether I liked it or not. And so when we go into the networking portion and trying to expand our network, we are essentially just building partnerships. And when we build partnerships, it's exactly like dating. You're going to want to learn about them. You're going to want to define what creates that chemistry, right? And when I talk about partnerships, these could be either general partners or limited partners. And there's a pretty common saying out there when you are looking for partners, is saying that you're looking for somebody that has complementary skill sets. But if we go by this criteria alone, there technically are a lot of potential partners. And I mean, there's plenty of them out there. If you're looking for partners as a general partner, you find someone that's just great at acquisitions, asset management, underwriting, raising capital, maybe just a key sponsor. People are always looking to partner up. If you're looking for passive investors, you're looking for people that want to invest in real estate, but don't have the time to manage the business, or vice versa. You're the passive investor looking for other operators to invest in. Now, the issue isn't finding these partners with complementary skills. It's finding quality partners with complementary skills that also align with your goals and values. And so, when we're, like I said, if you're looking for other general partners, do they have the same risk profile? Are they responsible and reliable? Can you actually trust this person? Are your goals aligned? What are your communication styles? And likewise for GP and LP relationship, the same goals and values also have to align as well when you are looking for operators or looking for other passive investors. Because at the end of the day, once we dive into this syndication space, these syndications are projected to be 5 to 7 year holds. I mean, maybe 2 to 3 if they're a quicker or development deal, but these are long-term relationships. It's almost like a marriage. And so when we jump into just networking, it's going to take time to build these relationships. Now, when we find now that we have this idea of just like building a partnership and understanding that it's going to take time, a pretty common phrase that everyone's always talking about is adding value. You need to add value to your partners. Maybe your value as coming into this. Maybe you even don't know your value and you don't have any experience at all. But whenever I got started and I jumped on calls, people would often ask me, or even at some points I would also ask them, how can I add value to you? Or if there's any way that I can add value to you, let me know. Imagine if we said this in a job interview. No one would no one would take it seriously. And on the other end, too, one of my biggest pet peeves when I hopped onto a call is trying to shove value in my face without the fully understanding my situation, my wants, my needs, my goals, and also my values. I would just maybe get a couple sentences out, and uh, then they would just try and give me advice on where I should go, just because they knew that I wanted to get into real estate. And I mean, we've all had situations like these, whether we're just meeting somebody for the first time or we're on a date where the other person is just talking the entire time, or you're the one that's pulling teeth, just trying to learn more, and it's just not going well. The conversation is going well. And so when we go and add value, the largest part of adding value goes beyond just the complementary skill sets that we bring. The large part of adding value, the high quality value proposition, is seeking understanding and of uncovering some of the challenges that our potential partners and also investors are facing. It's our job to figure out how we can add value. But what does adding value really mean? Well, regardless of whether you're an investor, you're a seasoned investor, you're just starting out, there's always ways that you can add value, and the right people will remember and take notice. And now we're going to go into strategy number 1. Virtual meetups. Even though right now there's in-person meetups, there's still plenty of virtual meetups, most likely in every single market that you're looking to invest in. And the best ways to find these virtual meetups are either in Facebook or LinkedIn. And sometimes there will be a specific topic discussed. Sometimes it could be strictly networking, where people are speed dating in Zoom breakout rooms. Or if there is going to be a specific topic, pretty often afterwards, everyone's going to want to network too. So these meetups, I mean, I've seen meetups happen throughout the day, and then also after hours when everyone's not working. So there's plenty of virtual meetups out there. You just have to take a look on Facebook and LinkedIn, and they typically have their own Facebook groups too, to where people can, see, and they post it on their social media. Now, the beautiful part about this is you can jump into any meetup across the country at the comfort of your own home. Now, when you are in this Zoom meeting, you're introducing yourself. Maybe you get to talk to someone for about 5 to 10 minutes per person. Mostly it's going to be introductory topics. But just because you showed up to this virtual meetup doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. The true key to making this strategy work is the follow-up. And in my opinion, it's truly the only way that you're going to be able to make this work. And so after you chat, you find them on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and you send them a message. And message them saying something along the lines of, hey, I saw we were in the same virtual meetup. I'm also interested in investing in this market. I would love to connect more and learn more about your background and investment goals. And if you have a Calendly link, you can make it easier for them and give them your link. But what if they didn't want to follow up with you? So we go in and we ask and we send them a message saying, hey, schedule a time with me. I think in my opinion, I think it's better if we ask for their availability. So at least like we are now investing in that relationship. I think one thing that I always saw when people jump in, or right when the Zoom meeting is about to end, people just put into the comments and say, hey, if you're looking to connect, here's my Calendly link. And then you hop onto the Calendly link and then they don't remember anything about you. And so when we go into this, really, truly try and make it as personable as possible. People, and also when you are reaching out to with these messages, I don't know about y'all, but people can tell if you're using a VA, a virtual assistant. I've had some people reach out to me that I've already had a conversation with, and even utilize some of their services, and they're selling me services. saying like, hey, I'd love to connect and learn about your investment goals or whatever. So really just try and make it as personable as possible. And maybe just do a quick glance of their LinkedIn saying like, hey, I have some familiarity or commonality with being an engineer, being a physician, being a doctor, and then make the connection. So just that little detail can take you a long way and separate yourself. So when we go into the conversation, we have to go in with some flexibility. We can't go in trying to convert an investor. We can't go in with a particular intention just because. I say this with quote unquote, because I mean, the intention is always going to be to seek understanding and learn about them. But if we come in with it, just a very strong specific goal, people can smell that and they're like, okay, hey, it sounds like you want something from me. You're trying to sell me your book, or you're trying to sell me your mentorship group or your mastermind group. Like, let's take a step back. And so people can kind of get defensive on that. Now, when we do start off the call, stay relaxed. Ask, hey, how's it going? Is now still a good time? This call is supposed to be about 30 minutes. Does that still work for you? I always like starting my calls this way, just because it establishes that, hey, I respect your time. If this time doesn't work, let's chat for another time. And it shows that you're really invested in their time. And so they say yes. And then now one of the common questions that I go to is, where are you calling from? Exactly how we started this call. Where are you calling from? Born and raised, talk about the Celtics for a little bit and how the Warriors beat them. But just something to break the ice. But as you start breaking the ice, you can also start to ask and get the conversation going, specific questions within real estate. And, what is your real estate experience? What are your real estate investment goals? Are you looking for cash flow? Are you looking for back-end equity? Are you looking to leave your W-2? What are you trying to accomplish? And then also one of my favorite questions, what markets are you looking to invest in? And so as our goal is to find their strengths, find their weaknesses, and know who their network is without specifically asking, more often than not, they're going to tell you exactly what they're working on and their specific skill set. They could be talking about, oh, I'm working on finding deals in this market, working on underwriting, working on asset management, I'm working on capital raising. And they might be part of a mastermind or a mentorship group or other virtual meetup. But in some cases, they'll actually have private group sessions for analyzing a deal, let's say within their mastermind or mentorship group. And when you also talk to them, you can ask them what other meetups they've gone to so you can attend the next one. Now, as you're wrapping up the call, it's time to start thinking of ways to have another touch point with that person. Of course, it's only if you actually like the person. If you don't want to have another touch point, totally okay. But there are cases where you're not going to vibe with someone, and that is totally fine. But I'm not talking about just sending them an article you saw on the market that they're investing in. What true value can you bring to the table? If you're an underwriter, you can offer your underwriting skills. If you have a lot of time and you're working on building broker relationships, you can cold call and try and bring deals to an underwriter. If you have an extensive capital raising network with some form of track record, you can bring that to the table too. But one of my ways, let's say that you don't have the first three, and and you're just starting out new, fresh out of college, and you don't know what to do, you can be the connector. And in my opinion, this is also one of the easiest ways and best ways to still establish yourself as credible without having those skill sets. Connect one person to the other. If you're still learning, it's the easiest way to add value. The reason why I asked the question on which markets they're investing in is because I personally keep a backlog of my network of who can I introduce them to. You know what? I actually met this investor the other day at this meetup who is currently investing in Austin. I think you two should connect, and it would be a great conversation. Now, the key part to this is do not just give them their contact information. I will repeat this. Do not just give them their contact information, because you don't actually know if they're going to reach out. And then, it's just kind of dead. Like, oh yeah, you should reach out to this person. Like, yeah, no, I'll definitely reach out. And then they never do. Right now, literally take their contact information, put them in a group text or a group email. Say something like, hey, I'd like to virtually introduce you to my friend. He's currently an investor in Houston. And I know that you're in Houston, and I thought you two would have a great relationship or a great conversation. You two can take it from here. Happy networking. And boom, you've instantly added value to both of these people, even if it's just a small portion of it. And even if whether they talk or not, at least each person knows that you're talking to somebody else in the industry and you're helping them expand their network. So yeah, key tips, just make sure that it's personable whenever you go into this. And then in terms of touch points, I mean, if we were going to summarize it up, you first meet them at a meetup. You have an initial reach out for a call, a reminder for the call. You actually get onto the call. You thank them for the call after. And then you have a potential follow-up action where you're introducing somebody from your network to their network. That's already 6 touch points as it is. And you can still continue to keep going. But this is one of the best ways to get started. Now, number 2, the second strategy of building relationships online is only going to be for a particular number of you, and that's going to be being a podcast guest. And this being a podcast guest is slightly catered more towards the seasoned, experienced investor that pretty much has a strong skill set as it is. And this method can be strong just because you're tapping into the podcasters network. But when I talk about network, though, I'm not just talking about the podcasters audience. You're also tapping into the podcast network that have been guests, and even that network that, let's say they weren't guests and they know somebody else within their group. And so this is really just a nice way just to have that conversation and add value to them, and then they can add value to you. There are plenty of podcasts out there that people are just starting up and looking for guests. I feel like people are finding a new podcast every day. And you don't have to be a guest on these large podcasts. You can work your way up with the smaller ones. Now, of course, you need some experience. So, but it's not, and something to offer when you're being interviewed. This will be harder to do, especially if you're someone that doesn't have any experience, because you have no social proof of why anyone should listen to you. But the term experience can be broad. You don't have to be a general partner for $7,000 or $1,000. Sometimes you don't even have to be a GP to be interviewed. You can be a passive investor first and leverage that experience to your audience. And if you're thinking about becoming a guest, here's just some preparation just to make sure that when you go in there, you actually know and have some of these answers prepared, because these are typically the most common. I mean, we've all heard real estate podcasts. These are typically the most common questions that come up. And so, with the first one, what is your origin story? When we talk about our origin story, I mean, so many people talk about reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and going down the rabbit hole of Bigger Pockets, and then eventually going into multifamily, for example. What I find that people really truly connect with is tapping into a specific experience or vulnerable story to let people know that you are human and you didn't just wake up and become a professional. So one person in my network, I've heard a doctor talking about how he needed to sign a will and create a will at the beginning of COVID, and he didn't know if he was going to come home. And that's what sparked his journey towards financial freedom. For myself, I was a professional hip hop dancer, and that deal on Jimmy Kimmel Live, I actually never got paid for that deal. The choreographer actually pocketed my money and then left. And so that was my journey towards entrepreneurship, and I didn't want to rely on anybody else. So it's just insightful stories like that where if you are genuine and authentic, people can connect to you, and sort of finds that commonality and connection. And you're not going to create a connection with everybody, but at least you're going to start growing some following too when you are a podcast guest, and then people are going to reach out to you. You can talk about details when your first deal. What were some of the obstacles, and how did what are some of the obstacles? How did you find the deal? How did you find that operator? Were the details of that deal? Was it a development deal? Was it a large multifamily value add? Was it a JV? Just know some of the ins and outs of that. And then also being able to talk about what you're now focused on for the rest of the year, and then the best way for people to reach out to you. If you don't have a website, or if you don't have a place where people can just reach out, just maybe having some form of a landing spot, a conglomerated spot where people can know exactly how to reach out to you in case they have any questions. And when you also become a guest too, they'll provide you graphics and a video snippet. Well, hopefully a video snippet that you can use to promote their brand and your brand. You can also ask them for raw footage and then have your team cut up the snippets and put your own branding on it. And if you did a good job and people really liked that conversation, they're going to definitely recommend you to hop onto another show. The thing with podcast networks is everyone is pretty close. I've even seen some some Facebook groups where it's just podcast guests, and then everybody just posts their show, and then next thing you know, people just are booked with everybody in the group. So they're out there. It just takes a little bit of work just to try and find it. But Facebook and LinkedIn, trying to find different podcasts to hop onto, definitely a plus. Now, moving forward to our third, and then this is actually my favorite strategy, but it requires more work, but it can be so beneficial. You can host your own podcast. Now, before you go on and say, Taylor, there are so many other podcasts out there, why should I start my own? Even if you only have 3 listeners per episode, it's one of the most powerful networking tools out there. You add social proof, you add you add value to others, you learn. But at the end of the day, when you host your own podcast, in its simplicity, it's such a good excuse to have a conversation. When I originally started my podcast, I had no true skills. I wasn't great at underwriting. I wasn't great at asset management, finding the broker relation, building broker relationships. Why would a broker really want to talk to me? And that was a lot of just my own limiting beliefs. And so for me, I really just wanted to learn, and no one would give me the time of day to speak to me for an hour. So I said, hey, let's just record a conversation, give them some graphics and a snippet, and we can talk for about an hour. Now, I had the chance to talk to people that were focused on acquisitions, focused on underwriting. There were lenders, there were capital raisers, asset managers. And if I didn't start my podcast, I would probably still be at square one. And so if you're lacking in a very specific skill set, let's use underwriting, for example, you now have a tool that you can use to interview other underwriters. You can ask them about their assumptions, the market conditions, what they look for, their pro forma, how to analyze a T12, how do you structure when you achieve a rent roll, how do you break it down into something that's usable instead of just a random PDF that is in text format. Sorry, there's a very personal experience because that was one of the things that definitely frustrated me. But let's backtrack. It isn't just about recording a conversation, though. There's so much intention to unpack, especially when making an impression, not only to your guest, but also to your network. Now, when you do interview some of these people, you are establishing some form of social currency. You're talking with industry professionals, you gain visibility from it. People are like, hey, wow, Taylor's looking is talking with, this expert. Seems like he's doing pretty well. I mean, even, he's still working his way up. That continue to go on and on. You can use it as a tool to invite other guests. Let's say we go back and we meet somebody at a virtual meetup, and you want another excuse just to reach out to that person. And you actually admired their expertise and knowledge, and it was just a great conversation. You can use this podcast as a way to follow up, and you have another excuse there to have more additional touch points and have that to continue that conversation. You have those intentional touch points, the reach out, calendar link confirmation, a reminder, the actual podcast recording, thanking them and asking for referrals, sending them graphics and clips, continuing the sending them the raw footage. I mean, the amount of touch points is, I mean, you can think of so many different creative ways. I mean, I know that some people even send gifts afterwards. They send people socks saying, thank you for being on my show. Another one of the reasons why I love this is you can gain knowledge as you go. You get to decide what you want to learn, who you want to talk to. Let's say if I was really focused on capital raising and I'm looking to connect with other operators, let's say, people that are focused on acquisitions or asset management, I can go do that. I can interview other operators, and that's it. And then also you build your own community of followers. As you start to build it, it's going to be very slow, but if you have a Facebook group, you can post on it and then create some form of community. And another one of the reasons why I love this podcast is you can have your own sponsorship opportunities. So let's say you are throwing let's say you have a mastermind group, or you have a virtual summit, for example. If you read the actual sponsorship in front of your guest, it's sort of like a soft pitch. Before we dive into this episode, I want to remind you that this episode is sponsored by the Multifamily Super Duper Virtual Summit happening in November, for example. Now, this would be extremely vital if you are looking for speakers to speak at your summit. If your guest is open to being a guest, they're more than likely open to speaking. If you have a mastermind group and you're looking for people to come in as content, you can have that person speak to your mastermind group. And then you're adding value to them because now they're expanding their network, and vice versa. And then the key part to this too is the conversations before and after. The value, that's where the value is. You build rapport, and afterwards you kind of talk about what they're focusing on. Still just another excuse to have that conversation. Now, when starting a podcast, this is my personal and recommended format, and you can take this for what it is, or you can make it your own. Definitely get creative with it. But I record for an hour. I block out an hour and 15 minutes for each recording. But realistically, I would only record for about 45 minutes to an hour. And I give that extra allotted time to give myself and also my guests enough time to build some rapport, learn about their goals, and for them to understand my goals as well. And when you optimize a recording session, I didn't have too much time because at this time I was still having just a full-time job. And so I would only have before and afterwards to record and do what I needed to do. And so I would split up one recording into 2 episodes. There's the story portion of the episode. This is the fall in love with you section, figuring out how they got started. What was the transition like? What are they focusing on now? This is really for the audience to fall in love with that person. And then we break off after 30 to 45 minutes, have a little break, maybe a little bio break, a little bathroom break, maybe get some coffee or water. And then you dive into the action items episode. And this is the portion where I use that as my coaching session. Typically the ice is already broken down, and now the conversation just flows a lot more. You can ask literally whatever you want. If I wanted to learn about underwriting, I would ask specific questions on what I should look out for. If I wanted to learn about capital raising, I would ask them how I should get started. And you can get as deep as you want with this, just because, I mean, that rapport has already been built throughout the episode. Well, hopefully. But at the end of just one session, you now have 2 podcast episodes you can post in the same week or in different weeks. So if you're really trying to optimize time, this is probably one of the best ways that you can break out your time and just make it as efficient as possible. Now, if you're going to, and then here on the side, you can see there's a number of touch points that I have when it comes to, when you do record with me. So there's a confirmation that you just booked it. Then you can text a reminder to the host. Actually, that's to me, and then to our guests. And then you can also thank them afterwards. I mean, you can get really creative with this. Now, when starting your own podcast, here is the basics and most essential high quality package, in my opinion. So you have your scheduling link. You can use Calendly. I'm not sure if you need to actually buy the license, but if you wanted to implement some of the workflow and the conversations, I believe you have to. But when people sign up, this is just an example of what people would see on my scheduling link. So you go in there, guest interview on the Multifamily Artist Podcast, which is my podcast. You get their name, you get their email, phone number. If you want to get their physical address, some people like this, some people don't, but at least you can send them something afterwards. And then you have their short bio, you have their links. So then you can just post that in the show notes, and then you can make sure that they're open to receiving messages. But the reason why I specifically structure this Calendly link is so I don't have to go back and ask for their bio. I don't have to go and look on their LinkedIn profile and come up with my own. They typically will already have media kits where you can create your own media kit. And now the work is done in the front end, so you can still optimize some of your systems in the back end to push it out. When, let's say, you post your podcast and then you have your guest notes, this is all there for you. Now, with the other resources, your recording platform, Zoom is a very popular one. I personally recommend Zoom if you want to record more than 45 minutes, if you want to just be careful and have that hour allotted. It's typically about $20 a month. The podcast hosting fee, I use Captivate.fm. And that is so this podcast hosting fee, you can blast it to all different podcast platforms. I think this is also about $20 a month, but it would post to Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, what other podcasting platforms out there. I've even had some people listen to me from, internationally, like Canada and India. I don't really know how they got in front of my podcast, but they listen to it. And so that's the podcast and hosting fee, is so they can broadcast it to all different platforms. For a microphone, I personally, I think this is one of the most important parts, especially when starting out with one, is making sure you have high quality content. Now, this one, I did some research. This is the Blue Yeti. You don't necessarily need this stands that right here, but it typically comes with its own stands. It's really, I think it's one of the high quality microphones at a cost efficient price. I think it's only around $90 to $120. But you don't have to go all out for this. But when people are listening to podcasts, they want to make sure that you have just not the staticky type of sound. So make sure you invest in a good in a good microphone. Headphones, I know some people use AirPods. Myself personally, I like to use the Audio Technica. So I can at least hear my voice when I am connected to the microphone. So it makes sure that I'm aligned with, and I can hear myself, and making sure that the audio isn't messed up as I'm speaking. In terms of graphic design, you can pay for Canva, or you can just use their free version. Canva is just a very powerful tool. If you're looking to create your own graphics, create your own cover art, and then you can also create templates. So if you want to just take out the guest image and put another guest image on there, definitely doable. Royalty-free music. This was actually one that I had trouble finding the most. I use Envato Marketplace. And I remember when I was looking around, I was I tried to just find royalty free music, but then I had to pay almost like sometimes $12 or $20 or $30 just for like 30 seconds. And I mean, it didn't really matter too much to me. But when you just, I guess, be careful when you are looking at Envato, because a lot of other people use it. So try and make it as unique as possible. I remember when I launched my first show, the same tune was actually the tune that was used for a Match.com sponsorship. And so I remember I was sitting with my family and we were watching just I think a TV show, and Match.com came out with this commercial, and then it was my music too. And so now whenever I listen to it, I think of Match.com, which I don't necessarily think is a great thing or not necessarily not a bad thing either. But I mean, just try and make your royalty free music as unique as possible. And then in terms of audio editing, I know people use Audacity. I personally liked Filmora. It's technically a video editing software, but you can also use it's pretty simple just to use it as audio. It takes a little bit of an intuition behind it, but that's one that I used. Now, putting it all together, I use strategies 1 and 3 the most, since I was just getting started at that time and I was just trying to expand my network and establish my credibility in so ways. But here were some of the key case studies that I look back at, and I never would have gotten this far and unless I use these strategies. So with the first case study, I actually became an honorary member of 2 mentorship groups. So when I first got my start, like I said, I didn't have money to join a mentorship group or a mastermind. And so my workaround was to network with all of the students in that mentorship or mastermind group. And these students would host their own virtual meetups. And I was able to connect with other students there, and they would have a breakout session too. And it came to a point where I connected with so many students that they would think that I was a student as well. And because they kept consistently seeing me, they actually invited me to one of their underwriting groups where they all analyzed a deal together. And another mentorship group that I joined, I actually interviewed this one person on a podcast that he reached out to me. He saw my podcast, and on the podcast, I talked about how I wanted to learn more about underwriting, because I feel like that's just one thing that's I feel like everyone just needs to know enough about in order to make it in this industry. But he invited me to his own mentorship group, underwriting group. And, they analyze deals every Thursday. And so I got to connect with more people in that group. And I mean, that was probably 2 of the coolest things, and probably the best workaround if you don't want to invest your capital into something like that. It just takes a little bit more work. Second case study, I connected 2 people I met on the podcast. So one of them reached out to me to be on the podcast. The other one I met at a meetup and had a follow-up call, and I ended up recording with both of them. About a few months later, one of the podcast guests posted on their social media that they were looking for a lender. Now, one of the other guests, I interviewed a lender, and so I made the introduction between the 2 of them. I used exactly what I put in this presentation, and they ended up working together. They closed on a deal just because I made that introduction. I interviewed the third case study. I interviewed a guest that was referred over to me from another guest, and he ended up inviting me to his investor experience / dinner in Vegas. And when I went over in Vegas, we ended up driving Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and I was just able to network there and build those relationships. And then also on top of that, if I never got started and made that first initial reach out to one person and continued to keep going, I wouldn't be in this position today working with one of the best operators in the game. I'm a little biased here, but I wouldn't have this opportunity to be at passiveinvesting.com. And so it just takes a little bit of a consistent effort when you are building these relationships, and understanding that it takes time. When you do start this journey, You're going to start to learn more about what you like, what you don't like. How many times when I guess we go into a first date, we immediately know everything that we want about somebody. It just doesn't happen often. So go out there, network, find some self-discovery as well, and realize it takes time. But everyone, I appreciate y'all for listening to me for the past, let's say, wow, 48 minutes. This is great. We can dive into questions though, if you're still here.